John stood in the dimly lit living room, the faint glow from the streetlights filtering through the window, casting streaks of pale light that seemed like the last remnants of a long, monotonous day. The silence seemed to seep into every corner of the house, where everything remained still but felt devoid of life. He looked toward Emily's bedroom door, the one she had closed after returning from her extended business trip. He wasn't sure if it was avoidance or just a new habit, but the feeling of loneliness clung to him, even though she was right there, just on the other side of that door. Leaning against the wall, John clenched his fists, trying to suppress the rush of emotions swelling inside him. These past few days, everything between him and Emily seemed to be unraveling bit by bit. He couldn't deny the coldness from her, and it was making him reflect on his marriage. He couldn't even remember the last time they had a cheerful conversation, one that wasn't about the kids or work, but about themselves, about the love they once shared. The light from his phone screen jolted him back to reality. It was a message from Sophia. A name he had been trying not to pay too much attention to, a woman he met recently during a few get-togethers with friends. But now, her message felt like a gentle pull, a reminder that he wasn't the only one feeling lonely in this world. "Are you okay?" the short message read, but there was a note of concern in it. He had met her a few times, and every encounter made him feel seen, noticed, something he hadn't felt in a long time with Emily. John stared at the screen for a moment, then lifted his gaze to the familiar surroundings of the house. Everything here felt so familiar, yet meaningless now. In a sudden motion, he locked the phone and set it down on the table. Part of him wanted to leave, to find somewhere else, anywhere without the old memories, a place where there were no short phone calls, no hurried messages. He silently stepped out of the living room, moving toward the bedroom door. He pushed it open gently. Emily was lying with her back to him, not turning around, not saying a word. The familiar scent of her, the one that used to comfort him, now made his chest tighten, though the feeling was no longer the same. How long had it been, he wondered, since her gaze had warmed his heart? Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed. A soft ping that stirred something unsettling inside John. He glanced at the screen, seeing the caller's name, Lucas. A former colleague of Emily's, someone who had always made John uneasy, though he had never dared to ask her about him. His stomach twisted, but before he could act, Emily turned, catching his gaze. She smiled, but it was cold, distant, as if everything had ended long ago. "What have you done to me?" John whispered, his voice heavy with pain and disappointment. Emily didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, her eyes a finality John had never prepared for. She turned back to face him, her eyes cold but still holding a trace of something unfamiliar that John couldn't explain. She didn't speak, she just shrugged slightly, as though she was hiding something deep within her. John stood there, feeling as though the room itself was suffocating him, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. The years they had spent together played out in his mind, like a slow-motion film that couldn't be turned off. They had once been two people so in love they couldn't bear to be apart, their early days filled with passion, sweet promises, and dreams of the future. They had weathered hardships together, raised children, shared dreams and ambitions. John vividly remembered those long nights after the kids had gone to bed, when it was just the two of them, their hands intertwined, whispering about their hopes and futures. The peaceful mornings spent drinking coffee, listening to the birds outside their window, everything had felt so perfect, so full of hope. But gradually, things had begun to change. The mornings remained the same, but the laughter, the closeness, was gone. Emily had begun staying up later, talking more often to colleagues, going out without telling him where. Meanwhile, John lost himself in his work, drowning in projects, never-ending deadlines. Each of them retreated into their own worlds, with no time to listen, to understand each other like they once did. John recalled one evening, late at night after the kids had gone to sleep, when he tried to reconnect with Emily, desperate to find some bond between them. He asked her about what she was thinking, about her dreams. Emily answered with short responses, her eyes no longer shining as they once did, as if she had built a world of her own that he couldn't reach. He felt alone, even when she was beside him. That feeling grew until one day, he no longer recognized the woman he had once loved. Then, Emily received an invitation to attend a long-term training course in another city. At first, John didn't think much of it, assuming it was a good opportunity for her to further her career. But as the time for her departure drew closer, he began to feel a strange unease rising within him. Was this her way of escaping family life? Was this her chance to find herself, while he remained trapped in his anxieties and responsibilities? When she left, John never imagined things would change so profoundly. The loneliness seemed to seep into every corner of the house. He tried to get used to living alone, but the more he tried, the more he felt the distance between them growing. Emily's calls became fewer and fewer. Her brief messages couldn't fill the emptiness inside him. And then one evening, while having a beer with friends, he met Sophia. She was a confident, alluring woman who effortlessly attracted attention. Sophia made him feel as though he could breathe again, a relief from the tension, the exhaustion of his marriage. Their conversations became light, easy, and gradually, John realized he was being drawn to Sophia in a way he couldn't stop. He didn't want to betray Emily. Never. But gradually, he realized that the loneliness and emotional deprivation in his marriage had led him to seek solace in Sophia, as a way to break free. The messages from Sophia, the unexpected calls, each one served as a reminder that he, too, deserved attention, understanding. Tonight, when he saw Emily walk back in, when she was no longer the woman he had once known, everything suddenly became crystal clear. Too many things were beyond repair, too many emotions had been buried under unkept promises, unmet expectations. John stood there, staring at Emily, knowing that everything had changed. He was no longer the man she loved, and she was no longer the woman he wanted by his side. He wondered, does love truly last forever? Or is it just a series of beautiful moments that slip away while we are too busy living? The answer, perhaps, lay not in words, but in the choices, in the decisions he had to make in this very moment. A cold gust of wind from the window made John shiver, but he didn't feel cold. In fact, he felt nothing, except for a deep, hollow ache in his heart. The memories of Emily and him, of the love they had once shared, now only fragments, broken pieces that could never be put back together. She had drifted far away, physically and emotionally, and now he was left alone with painful thoughts of what had been. During the time Emily was away for her course, John hadn't anticipated the profound changes within himself. He had thought of it as a temporary break, a brief period for Emily to pursue her career, and that everything would eventually return to normal. But no, as the days passed, and Emily grew busier with her studies and work, John felt her absence more deeply. The long, empty nights, the dinners with no one to share them with, and especially the rare calls from Emily made him feel as though he was no longer an important part of her life. Then one evening, as John was having a casual drink with some friends at a pub, he met Sophia. She didn't seem remarkable when she first walked in, but her eyes, her radiant smile, and her confident way of speaking immediately drew him in. It wasn't just her physical attraction, but something deeper, a sense of understanding, a deep loneliness he had been longing for. Sophia didn't just listen, she made him feel truly cared for. The first meeting took place in a cozy corner of the pub. John had arrived with a heavy heart, but as soon as Sophia began talking, he felt like he could finally breathe again. They talked about books, movies, small things he'd never thought about. Sophia looked at him not with judgment, but with genuine interest. The following meetings, the conversations that lasted until late into the night, seemed like the only thing he looked forward to after long days at work. John had never imagined he would find himself in this situation. He had always been so strict with himself, always placing his family first. But the emotional void he felt with Emily led him to seek comfort from someone else. The conversations with Sophia gradually turned into meetings he couldn't miss. The sense of understanding he found with her was something he had never felt with Emily over the years. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful workday, John received a text from Sophia. "Are you okay? Want to take a walk with me?" Simple words, yet they had a powerful pull. He looked at the phone, then back out the window. The world outside continued to turn, but inside, everything seemed to stop. He knew this was wrong, but the desire to be noticed, to feel that he wasn't alone in this world, was too overwhelming. It was then that he realized just how far he had drifted from everything that once mattered to him. The desire for connection, the hunger for understanding, had drawn him into Sophia's orbit, and he didn't know how to get out. He had allowed his loneliness, his emotional deprivation, to guide him down this path. And so, instead of going home, he drove to meet Sophia. They took a walk through the park, talking about life, aspirations, and dreams. When they sat on a bench, Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, and that closeness made John's heart race. He couldn't deny that, for that brief moment, he felt important, valued, feelings he hadn't experienced in so long with Emily. At that point, he knew he couldn't turn back. That weekend, when Emily called, her voice sounded tired. Her calls had become short, even lacking the warmth they once had. "I'm fine, don't worry," Emily said, but John could feel the distance in her tone. Meanwhile, Sophia sent him messages every day, always checking in and waiting for their private moments together. The feeling of being wanted, being cared for, made it impossible for him to return to the way things used to be. He couldn't forget the understanding Sophia brought into his life. That night, John decided to meet Sophia once again. They met at a small cafe near the old neighborhood. It felt as if no words were needed, they just needed to be with each other. Sophia looked at him with sincere eyes, her hands tightly clasping his, and then a gentle kiss touched his lips. He knew then that he had crossed a boundary he once set for himself. In that moment, he felt he was no longer the family man he used to be, but a man seeking solace in another relationship. When he returned home late that night, his mind was still consumed with the image of Sophia. Emily had yet to return from her class, and the room was empty, the only sound being the passing hours. Everything was changing in a way that John could no longer control. Emily's calls and messages had become a mere duty, while his relationship with Sophia was growing increasingly complicated. He wondered if he could ever return to the life he once knew, or if it was already too late. Suddenly, he realized he had become trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape from. His love for Emily had faded, while his relationship with Sophia, though new, was slowly taking over his heart. But the only thing he knew for sure was that his life was no longer the same. The betrayal, even if just once, had eroded everything he had once believed in. The next morning, John woke up with a strange feeling. He glanced at the phone beside his bed, its screen still glowing with messages from Sophia. But this time, instead of joy, a sense of anxiety welled up inside him. He wondered how much longer he could continue living this lie. But when he thought about Emily, that vague feeling crept back. She was no longer the person he could share everything with. She had become distant, cold. And in a moment of weakness, he had found a connection elsewhere. When Emily called that morning, her voice sounded tired and hollow. She spoke in short sentences, devoid of the concern she used to show. "Are you okay? I just wanted to let you know that the course is going well." She ended the call quickly, as if something more important was waiting for her. But John felt it clearly, her absence had stretched on for too long, and they no longer had any connection. Later, as he worked in his office, his phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Can you meet me this weekend? I need to talk to you." The brief message, but with a serious undertone, sent a wave of nervousness through John. A feeling of unease and worry washed over him. Had she found out what was going on? Was she suspecting him? A deep anxiety surged in his chest. The weekend drew closer, and John couldn't shake the tension. He didn't know how to prepare himself. Had Emily discovered everything? Would his life be forever changed? He thought about Sophia, about the moments she had given him. But then, he remembered the years he spent with Emily, the family, the memories that once seemed so beautiful. He didn't want to hurt her, but he couldn't deny that he had already fallen into another relationship, one that was deeply alluring. That weekend, John met Emily at the cafe where they used to meet before. She had arrived first, sitting alone, staring into a cup of coffee that seemed to have lost its taste. Her coldness immediately made him feel uneasy. Emily didn't look like the woman she once was, no longer warm, no longer tender. All that remained was distance, indifference. "I want to talk about us," Emily said, her eyes still fixed on the cup. "Do you feel like we're drifting apart?" John was silent, staring at her. He didn't know what to say. Could it be saved? Could they go back to the way things were? Part of him wanted to say he would try, that he would start over, but another part was just too exhausted to continue. He had become trapped in a situation that now felt too overwhelming to face. Emily looked up at him, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept all night. "I've realized something, John. I can't keep living in a relationship without real love. You're not the person I knew. You're not the person I loved." Those words hit him like a slap to the face. Everything he had tried to hide, everything he had ignored, suddenly became undeniable. He couldn't hide anymore. He had changed. And Emily, it seemed, had known this for a long time. John felt like everything around him was suddenly collapsing. He had lived in deceit for too long, and now, the truth was inescapable. He looked into Emily's eyes, feeling as if an endless void was opening before him. "I can't go back to the way it was, Emily. I've changed." "Is that so?" Emily replied coldly, her gaze no longer holding any warmth, only disappointment. "You really think I didn't know? I've known for a long time, John. You've changed, not just in the way you treat me, but in the way you treat yourself." Her words were like a final blow, striking deep into his mind. The pain he felt wasn't coming from Emily, it was from himself. He had hurt the woman he had loved for 15 years. He had let everything slip through his fingers without being able to hold on to it. Emily's look gradually shifted to one of firm resolve. She wasn't regretful, nor angry. It was simply the end, and she had accepted it. "We can't continue anymore. You and I, we're no longer one. You need to go, and so do I." John sat there, frozen. Everything seemed to crumble before his eyes. Emily stood up, preparing to leave. That was the moment John realized that he had lost everything. He lost his family, his wife, and all that remained were the wounds he had inflicted upon himself. As Emily turned away, his heart shattered. In the end, he was left alone, facing the truth that everything he had tried to hold together was no more. Emily left without looking back, leaving behind a cold void that enveloped John. He sat silently in the cafe, watching her figure fade away through the window. Each step she took felt like a knife cutting deep into his heart, but he couldn't stop watching her leave. He no longer had the strength to chase after her, nor the courage to call her back. It was over, and he knew there was nothing he could do to change that. All that remained was silence, the silence of things unsaid, of promises broken, of a relationship that could no longer be saved. For a moment, John felt empty. He had lost everything, not just his family, but himself in the long journey of his marriage. After leaving the cafe, John returned to the house, now feeling a profound solitude. Everything was the same, but the air in the house felt different, cold and heavy. He entered the bedroom, where Emily had once slept beside him every night. The room was empty, no voices, no laughter, no late-night conversations. The memories rushed back to him, but they no longer brought the warmth they once did. Everything was now just shadows of the past, things that could never be relived. John sat on the bed, staring into the mirror on the wall, wondering if he even recognized himself anymore. Had he changed so much, or had he never truly understood himself? He had thought of himself as the ideal husband, the ideal father, always putting his family first. But now he realized he had lost himself in trying to please everyone else. He was no longer the man Emily needed. He was no longer the man he once hoped to be. Loneliness surrounded him like a wave crashing over him. He knew Emily wouldn't come back, that what they had built was no longer worth anything, and that their paths had diverged. But deep in his heart, he still loved her, still remembered the sweet days when their love wasn't consumed by time and invisible responsibilities. The next day, John received a call from Sophia. Her voice was warm, but this time he didn't feel the excitement he used to. He answered distractedly, feeling like he was living in a blur, no longer clear on what he truly wanted. Sophia, sensing the change in his tone, gently asked, "John, what's wrong? Is something happening?" He sighed, closing his eyes, unsure of how to answer. I can't continue with this, Sophia." The words came out like a release, but also as the end of a new chapter. "I can't hurt Emily anymore, and I can't live in this lie." There was a long silence before Sophia replied in a calm, understanding voice, "I understand, John. I don't want you to feel forced. But you have to face your choices, understand that every choice comes with a price." He could feel the understanding in her words, but it didn't ease the pain in his chest. Sophia was the one he needed right now, the one who offered him the comfort and attention he lacked. But Emily was still his wife, and his marriage, though broken, was something he couldn't ignore. When he hung up the phone, it felt as though the world around him had stopped turning. He knew he had lost the chance to mend things with Emily, and now, all he could do was move forward. There was no other choice but to face the consequences of his actions, no way to go back to the past. A week later, John decided to meet Emily once more, not to apologize, but to end everything properly. He found her at a small cafe, the place where they had first met before they got married. She looked at him with a cold expression, but not one of anger, just resolve. "I've thought about this a lot, John," she began, her voice soft but without compassion. "We've reached the end of the road. I can't go back." John felt the pain in each word, but he knew she was right. It had ended a long time ago, and now, there was only peace in the fact that they were finally letting go. After their conversation, John returned home, carrying a sadness that couldn't be named. He had done wrong, and now he had to live with the consequences of those decisions. But deep down, he knew he couldn't go back. Everything had a price, and now he had to learn how to face himself in the years to come. That day, when John closed the door behind him, it wasn't just the end of a chapter in his life, but the beginning of a new journey. A journey to heal, to find himself again, to understand that freedom wasn't running from pain, but accepting it and moving forward. He wouldn't try to fill the emptiness in his heart with lies or hiding, but by living truthfully, no matter how difficult it might be. In the end, John realized that only by letting go of everything that had been, could he find peace in his soul.